That's what we all want, is we want understanding. And if you have mutual understanding in a way that's shared, in a way that's very meaningful, that's when you really trust a person.
I have a conversation with someone I really trust, and then they start saying things that are a bit off. All of a sudden, my mind turns on. What are they doing?
Alarm bells.
What are they saying?
Because in a world where you have so many opportunities for meeting new people, what's of the most value right now? It's shared history. This kind of relates to our own sort of family history, where we never really liked the word faith and the sorts of words that kind of implied just have faith, because we were always very adamant about, like, okay, you want to have reasons and a rationale for why you're doing something or why you're believing in something. And for that reason, we also didn't really like or use the word trust, because it also kind of implies faith, like, just trust me, like, and then it's just like, oh, okay, but like, can I like ask some questions or like,
I think our dad would always say, trust but verify.
Right, yeah.
Which in other words means
don't trust.
Don't trust.
Well, I mean, and it's like trust for a certain time period, but like keep verifying,
Yeah.
But
have reasons behind it.
Yeah.
Concrete reasons.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think that we've kind of warmed up to the idea of kind of like the necessity for some degree of faith, in terms of, practically speaking, like, you can't know really much of anything other than like 2 + 2 with like 100% certainty. And because
math is one of the things that's very
it's like
certain.
You do
subjective.
actually have a concrete answer, but for most other sorts of like decisions and fields, there is some degree of uncertainty, even if it's very little, but that you kind of have to overcome in order to make decisions. In order for us to start, press record on this podcast, I don't know if I'm gonna like have a seizure while I'm in the middle of it, I don't know what's gonna happen necessarily, but we still press record and we're here because we still need to make practical decisions, and our level of confidence is not going to be 100%, but we want to make sure we're like, in a place where we feel comfortable, and kind of that faith aspect in our minds, in a practical sense, kind of like makes up the difference between that 100%. I was watching this video from one of the Green brothers, like John Green from Crash Course, and he's talking about like he did a video on like what to do with your life, and he was saying like it can seem like when you make decisions, your options shrink, but even if you don't make decisions, your options will still shrink. So it's kind of like, you have a sort of thing where it's like, okay, either I can like wait around and try to be even more sure about what I'm going to do, or I can do it and then I'm collecting more information. I'm getting like more, a lot of understanding from that, right, and experience. So I think that when it comes to trust and relationships, I do think that there is a value to understanding what that actually is, but I don't think it really is just about like, oh, okay, like I trust you, and so I'm just like never gonna think about what you're doing, like I'm just gonna say, oh yeah, I trust you, and then la-di-da,
Yeah.
When it comes to relationships, I think that there's a specific aspect of trust that's important, because you want to feel safe to be vulnerable in relationships, and you want to not have them disappear, and you want to just basically be comfortable with somebody else, right? You don't, when it comes to the kinds of relationships that we don't want the kind in which we're constantly having to evaluate, like, are they gonna try to screw me over, right? It's like, obviously that's not fun. And I think that that's kind of what we want to seek out in terms of like a good relationship, is one in which we feel like we have a strong mutual understanding with the other person, that we don't have to be constantly worried about them. Right? We were inspired by Ray Dalio, and the founder of Bridgewater, about this concept of radical transparency, where basically you just try to be as transparent as possible about what's going on in with your thoughts, and if you have any negative feedback for someone, that you just let them know. And he applied this in a professional context at Bridgewater, where it was like live streaming meetings and like giving negative feedback, even if like you were in a group with other people. But we kind of took it even a step further in terms of with our family members. Like if you're working at Bridgewater, you're still not going to be like, like, I was just having a midlife crisis and I'm like rethinking everything. That's different than like being very transparent about everything that might be relevant to a work context, right?
Yeah. So. Whereas, so our version of it is that you're transparent about everything.
Right. Or you try to be. Where you try to be.
You try to be. Because obviously you can't really do that. Because you only have so much time in your life. You can't explain and try to articulate every single moment by moment thought.
But to at least try to, like, if you have a thought that's relevant to somebody else, share it. You know, it's like, don't keep it to yourself. If and we particularly, you know, did that in the family, because we kind of, there's like the Carl Jung talks about, like, if for a tree to reach heaven, its roots must go down to hell, in terms of, like, basically the shadow aspect of human nature. And like Jordan Peterson talks about how when you're reading about these atrocious events throughout history, you should be learning about it as things that you would also be capable of doing, and not to think, oh my God, wow, there used to be so many bad people. It's like, no, it's like, it's just that human beings are imperfect, and there are plenty of horrible things that we're capable of doing, and that's true for everybody. And if you pretend that that's not the case, then that's really, really dangerous. You're going to be even more susceptible to those things.
During World War II, all the Germans, like, they weren't all just evil. They weren't all
I guess if you're German, that just means you're bad. It's
no. If you were in their situation, living out through their lives, you would have done the same thing.
Well, they were like, their country's economy was decimated from World War I, and so everyone was starving. It was like an economic crisis. It's like, okay, you have to think about the context of those people, and the fact of the matter is, if you were living there during that time, you were almost certainly not one of the people who were like trying to go around, like, risk your life to, like, save people. That's like, that's not how that works. Everybody's trying to do the right thing, and but I think that,
so you can't say trusting people as in, I believe you're gonna try to do the right thing.
That's
because everyone is trying to do the right thing.
I mean, you should always trust intent, in terms of, like, to say, like, oh yeah, I know you were trying to do the right thing. It's like, that doesn't necessarily really mean anything. Like, everybody's trying to do the right thing.
No one wakes up and is like, ha ha, I'm gonna be bad today.
And part of the reason why we didn't really like the term trust is that it's like, part of the reason why we were implementing this radical transparency philosophy within our own family is that it's like, you shouldn't necessarily trust yourself, because you like everybody else is imperfect and has blind spots and is gonna make mistakes, and you're gonna hurt the people that you love the most sometimes without knowing it, because you're not perfect, it's just like as simple as that. And so to think, okay, then if I, like, can't even trust myself with those sorts of things, how are you supposed to then, like, trust another person? But I think that there are certain factors that can lead to trust in a practical sense, not in an absolute sort of, like, perfect theoretical, like, if we're talking about, like, in theory. It's like, no, practically you trust this person.
It's kind of interesting, because with trust, if you're, like, at 90%, that's basically similar to, like, 10% trust, where you're like, where you're not really trusting.
It's not much better than 70% or 50%.
Yeah, like I have a conversation with someone, like, I really trust, and then they start saying things that are a bit off and are not resonating. All of a sudden, my mind turns on. What are they doing?
Alarm bells.
What are they saying?
Oh, it's like, when it comes to whether or not you trust somebody, practically it kind of has this exponential sort of graph where it's like you're starting at like 0% trust and then 100% trust, and what it looks like is like boing, right at like 99%, because if it's like, oh, only 1 out of 10 times you're gonna, like, screw me over, it's like, what? It's like, that's not very good,
not
trust. And even if it's like 5 out of 100 times, if it's like a 5% chance, that's still like a lot in terms of whether or not you want to really be vulnerable with this person.
Yeah, and I think the main thing is, like, if you think that their understanding of the world is, like, matching up with yours, I think that's the main thing that trust is built on, because it's like people will use this word, like, resonating, and I think that's a really helpful word, because the way that someone, like, if you slightly change the tone of voice, you slightly change the wording of something that's someone's saying, that's, like, representing something about their values or something about their perception of the word, and all of a sudden it can like completely not resonate.
Yeah.
Like I love dogs versus yeah, I love dogs. Or,
right.
Yeah, I like dogs.
Right.
You know, it's completely different meaning there.
Right.
And
if all you do is hang out with dogs all day, then it's like
either
that's like, oh, I could hang with this person, or it's like, nah.
Yeah. So when it actually does resonate, when it resonates fully, is when you'll have this like bond that'll start growing,
right?
Or you'll have this bond that'll just completely click.
Yeah, well then there's also the aspect of like how deep is your understanding of the world, because somebody can have a similar understanding as you, but if there's somebody that's not very grounded in their beliefs, and like maybe they like how get caught up in some other friend group and now they're a totally different person, now they don't care about you or anything you're doing, it's like
the main value you hold, the main belief or goal you strive towards is like Taylor Swift songs. You guys both really like Taylor Swift songs,
and then one of you guys has a midlife crisis, doesn't like Taylor Swift anymore. It's like
no. There you go. There goes the trust.
Friend. Yeah. And so I think that there's a few aspects of this where I think that a big part of it is, you know, how much is there a connection between sort of your own understanding and the actions that you display? Because I think that what a lot of people can be conditioned into in a world in which often is lacking of very meaningful and trusting relationships is that you have people who are very good at being positive and getting positive reactions out of other people, because you can just be conditioned. Like obviously you like it when people around you like you, right? And so it's very, very easy for somebody to just be kind of conditioned into, oh, if I say and do these things and people like me, right? And then you can seem like, you know, trusting like I can trust this person because they're nice and they give me good feelings, you know, but then there's also a lot there in terms of like, okay, but is that coming from a conditioned process, and what is it that's actually driving that? And is this sort of like, will the things that they tell me actually resonate, like will actually be reflected in their actions, right? And are they just saying these things because it'll, you know, make it so that it's less uncomfortable in the moment, or is it because it's what they actually believe and they're actually following up on those sorts of things, you know? And I think that there's a big aspect there in terms of like, to see if somebody's trustworthy, that you definitely need to see what they actually do, and whether or not that actually lines up with their actions, because in a world in which it's really hard for people to kind of like, because you're kind of don't necessarily have a lot of long-term relationships, and your relationships are kind of like segmented into like, oh, you have this certain group where you're doing these things with, but they're not seeing all the other things that you're doing with other people. It's also really hard to have that accountability of like, oh, you said you believe this, and maybe you seem like you believe that with those people, and then you go talk to somebody else and it's totally different, but you don't see that because it's not the kind of like close-knit communities in which we used to be in, where like the reason why humans developed language initially was gossip, was to see, can I trust this person? Like, oh, did you hear Mandy did this? And then if you heard Mandy say something about not doing that, then it's like,
ugh. Do bad thing,
right? Yeah,
you know.
It was like, who can I trust? Who can I rely on? And I think that's like one really big signal is like, is this person actually being honest with their actions? But then also like, how much do they actually understand themselves and can articulate that to you? Because I think that's a big aspect in terms of like, the more you understand something, the more predictable it becomes. The more you can try to, if I understand you more and more, then I'm going to be able to anticipate the actions and the sorts of things where it's like, you know, this is something that, you know, that's why it's like, I think birthdays can be really great, because you're basically demonstrating, do I actually understand what will make this person happy, right? Because like when I'm setting a birthday celebration, oh, this will make Isla happy. Oh, this will make Isla happy, right? And then I get to test it, and then I get to see, you know, and that's something where it's like, the more you understand somebody, the more predictable they become, and that just kind of, that's how you understand anything, you know. The more you understand anything, the more predictable it will become, and I think that's also can be really helpful in terms of like seeing. But I think it's also really hard because of the data sets that we get these days are so all over the place and hard to understand, because it's like, okay, maybe I've known this person for like 6 months. It's not a very long time in the grand scheme of things,
that's
you know.
One reason why it's like much easier, I think, to even if you don't have a good relationship with your family, but like you can build on it,
right?
Because because you've known them for so long, then it's much easier to rebuild that trust, because then people will remember, oh yeah, you know, I knew them when they were a kid, I knew them when growing up, and and then it's a lot easier to rebuild that trust and rebuild that understanding on all of those memories and stuff. Versus you're starting from scratch. You don't know what they were like when they were a kid. They could have. You have no idea. You know,
both our parents were financial regulators. Our mom has like a PhD in economics. Like what you're doing, you're trying to build a mathematical model to try to represent what's actually going on in terms of like you know, consumer patterns or like what's actually going on in the economy. And one thing that happens is you like build a model that's like works great and it's kind of based off of the data that you have maybe for the past 10 years. But then the moment there's a regime change, the model breaks because something that happened, you know, that makes the environment different, and then your old model doesn't work anymore, you know. And that's something where I think like when it comes to
thinking about like maybe that model in terms of the metaphor, I'm thinking that model's like your understanding of the person, and then when the person changed, the models break,
so you can have a interpretation of like you know, a person, you have a model of this person and it seems like, oh yeah I really know this person, and then something changes in their life and it's like all of a sudden you have no idea. And that's part of the reason why when you were talking about family, it's like you have all the data from their entire life, so that model has been tested through regime changes of like different life, you know, big life events happening, and you know, somebody changing and evolving themselves.
And when you've got a model that's broken, you can tell pretty quickly, like something will feel off. So you can't rely on that model, which means the trust is completely gone. If you can't rely on your model, then all of a sudden all the possibilities become possible of like all the things you think they could possibly do to you to hurt you or something like that.
And
so you can't be vulnerable anymore.
And that's why I do think that building, you know, trying to, you know, have a good relationship with, you know, family members in terms of being able to, you know, have people that you actually have that data with, because in a world where you have so many opportunities for meeting new people, what's of the most value right now? It's shared history, right? You know, and I think that when it comes to the sort of last aspect that I was thinking about in terms of practically getting to that trust, I think if somebody has a really good understanding of themselves and you're able to see that what they say and their actions are all very consistent, then what the next sort of aspect is like, will they respond well to accountability in terms of providing feedback? Because if somebody has a good understanding of themselves, they'll also know that they don't have a perfect understanding of themselves, and they'll want to improve that understanding with the people that know them best, right? And I think that that's really important in terms of like, I think that the more sorts of types of feedback that you're subjected to, the more you're able to build a solid understanding of yourself, and the more you know, you kind of have different sorts of ways in which you can triangulate your understanding of reality and the understanding of yourself, right? And I think that that's really, really important, because most of the time when people do things to hurt other people, it's just because they didn't know, and they just, you know, it's like the Hanlon's razor, don't attribute malice that which can be adequately, you know, explained by stupidity. It's
or
like
ignorance.
We like to say ignorance, not stupidity, where it's like, you know, okay, they didn't know about something and then they made this mistake, and it's like, okay, that's what a mistake is, right? If you knew it was bad, then that would just be like trying to do something bad, which people generally don't try to do, you know? And so I think that that's really, really important in terms of who can you trust. It's people who have a good understanding of themselves, so they can not screw up, you know, and they can know like, oh, okay, here's the ways in which I kind of repeatedly fail, and maybe you can help me with that, and they'll communicate with you about those things, you know? And I think that that's really important in terms of why it's really important to have those feedback loops, because you need to have ways in which you can start to develop a deep understanding of yourself. And that's why, you know, I think it is important to engage in things that have feedback loops, because that's like kind of the difference between hard sciences and some of these other sorts of things, where it's like you have an immediate, direct, objective feedback loop, which isn't going to teach you about yourself. It might teach you about like chemistry or something, right? But it's still it's that process of engaging with a feedback loop. Whereas, you know, when it comes to, if you're just like painting a picture in your room, you're not getting any feedback unless you actually share it with people, but that requires initiative, and then it's still hard because most people will be like, oh yeah, it's a great painting, even if they think it just looks like
even if they even it's so subjective,
right? Yeah.
And it's great to learn how to interpret those subjective feedback loops. But you still need to have a feedback loop, even if it's subjective.
And I think that the feedback loops, to see who is subjecting themselves to feedback loops versus hiding from feedback loops, because I think trustworthy people don't hide from feedback loops. And one of the best feedback loops is long-term relationships. And I think that that's why people will trust you more if you have had a really long-standing marriage, right? Or if you have a really good relationship with your family, that's a really good indication that you're able to stick with a long-term feedback loop that is going to be uncomfortable. You don't meet anybody who hasn't had uncomfortable or bumpy.
People trust parents more because it's like they've got to deal with this kid who's doing things that annoy you all the time.
Right. It's like there's gonna be bumps in the road with any kind of long-term relationship, and so if you're able to deal with that and learn from that, then that means that this person has gone through a real feedback loop, that is helping them to have an understanding of themselves. So hopefully they can not make the same sorts of mistakes that they might have been making in that relationship with you, right? Or with other people. And so I think that a lot of this comes down to understanding, because the more that people understand themselves and the world, the more they'll be able to understand you as well. And it's like that's what we all want, is we want understanding. And if you have mutual understanding in a way that's shared, in a way that's very deep and meaningful, that's when you really trust a person, because it's like, that's what we have. It's like we understand each other so well that it's like, I can anticipate the ways in which we can work together, the ways in which I can make you happy, the ways in which you can make me happy. And because we're doing that for each other, because making you happy will make me happy, and I know that because I've experienced it, then we're able to just keep helping each other in a way that's really frictionless.
And that's one reason why siblings are so amazing, because because you've got an amazing opportunity, because you're basically stuck with this person for 18 years,
right,
around there, and then you're forced to have that feedback loop. You're forced to work things out and improve on your model, because you can't just
ideally
have it break.
If you don't just hide from each other.
Exactly. So if you're engaging with each other consistently, you're forced to improve that model.
I think that what real trust actually provides for you is a way for you to try to triangulate an understanding of yourself. But that also means that, you have somebody else there who is not just seeing the pretty perfect sides of you, but they're seeing the ways in which you're screwing up and the ways in which you're an imperfect human being. And that can be really, really terrifying. But I think that if you're doing it right, and if you're building that trusting relationship, it should feel terrifying, but it's worth it for the pursuit of having that deep understanding.